Frederica Sophia Wilhelmina, the eldest daughter of the Prussian Crown Prince Frederick William and his wife Sophia Dorothea of Hanover, was born at the Schloss in Berlin on the 3rd of July 1709. But her entry into the world was unfavourably received, as her parents were hoping for a prince. Their wish was fulfilled on the 24th of January 1712, when Princess Sophia Dorothea gave birth to a son. The long-awaited prince was named Frederick. A year later, when the children's paternal grandfather died, their father ascended the throne and became king in Prussia as Frederick William I. Another event that would have a significant bearing on Wilhelmina's life took place in 1714, when her maternal grandfather, the Elector of Hanover, ascended the throne of Great Britain as George I. Meanwhile, Princess Wilhelmina was handed over to her governess, while the education of the Crown Prince was entrusted to Madame de Rocoul, a French Huguenot refugee, whom Frederick affectionately called Chère Maman. As this kind French lady was a constant presence in the children's nursery, she was able to teach the royal siblings to speak French as their mother tongue. However, Wilhelmina's governess was of a different sort, and under her tyrannical care the princess would suffer in silence for a number of years. Not a day went by, Wilhelmina said, without her exercising the strength of her formidable fists upon my poor body. When it was found out that the princess was frequently unwell because she was mistreated, Wilhelmina was placed with a new governess. Being of a gentle nature, this lady had a positive influence on Wilhelmina, who began to relish her studies. She later wrote, "My new governess endeavoured to inspire me with good sentiments on every occurrence. I applied myself to reading, which soon became my favourite occupation. I learnt English, Italian, history, geography, philosophy, and music. I was so intent upon learning that my governess was obliged to moderate my enthusiasm. As all her time was taken up by her studies, her only recreation was to see her brother. Never was affection equal to ours," wrote Wilhelmina, and later Frederick would echo his sister's words by saying, "Although we had separate bodies, we had but one soul." One day, Queen Sophia Dorothea began to confide in her daughter all the hopes and ambitions she had for her. Wilhelmina, her mother thought, would become one day Queen of England. During a visit of her parents to Hanover, a marriage between Wilhelmina and the Duke of Gloucester, son of the Prince of Wales, was discussed by the families of Hanover and Prussia. Moreover, in the hope that a double marriage might draw closer the ties between England and Prussia, the marriage of Crown Prince Frederick with Princess Amelia, daughter of the Prince of Wales, was also considered. This double alliance, Wilhelmina wrote in her Memoirs, was resolved upon to the great satisfaction of my mother, who had always so ardently wished for it. Meanwhile, under her mother's guidance, Wilhelmina was being drilled on how to behave in preparation for a visit that George I was about to make to Charlottenburg. He was coming to discuss the alliance between Britain and Prussia and meet his granddaughter. The Queen, who insisted on making her daughter slender than she was, ordered her stays to be so tightly laced that Wilhelmina was almost deprived of respiration. When she was presented to King George, Wilhelmina fell prey to a cruel agitation. She described how it went. As soon as I entered the room, he took a candle and examined me from head to foot, while I all the time remained motionless as a statue and very much disconcerted. All this passed without his saying the least thing to me. As the outcome of her daughter's marriage was still uncertain, in August 1725 the Queen went to see her father at Hanover. There she learned that he was still favourable to the marriages, yet he postponed any final decision until the British Parliament had met. And in Wilhelmina's case he mentioned her own young age and that of the Duke of Gloucester. It was just a matter of time, the king assured his daughter. In this way, Prussia was induced to keep its close ties with England. Marriages with England, double or single, were the dream of Sophia Dorothea. And, as her ambition was unbounded, the Queen flattered herself that she could make it happen. But she had forgotten the House of Austria. When Frederick William wasn't doing what he liked most, namely to drill his regiment of colossal men 6 feet in height, or giants as they were known, he would spend his time in his Parliament room drinking with his companions. General von Grumko, the Prime Minister of Prussia, and Count Seckendorf, the Emperor's Austrian envoy. Alarmed at the alliance concluded in September 1725 between Prussia, England and France, Emperor Charles VI sent Seckendorf to Berlin in 1726 with the mission of detaching Prussia from this coalition in order to keep Frederick William under the imperial thumb. Therefore, Seckendorf teamed up with Grumko, whom he bribed, and they both began their schemes. They managed to convince the Prussian king to move away from England, and in the autumn of 1726 Frederick William signed a treaty with the emperor. By the Treaty of Wusterhausen, Prussia abandoned the Treaty of Hanover and agreed to help the emperor in case he was attacked on German soil. The sudden death of George I in 1727 cast a shadow of doubt over Sophia Dorothea's plan to make her daughter the wife of the new Prince of Wales, as George II and his brother-in-law, Frederick William, despised each other deeply. George II hinted that the marriages would be offered if Prussia returned to the alliance with England's allies. But as the emperor wished to prevent such an alliance, the marriages should not take place. To that aim, Seckendorf was working to stiffen Frederick William against England. He told Frederick William that George II only wanted to separate him from the emperor in order to ruin him. As Frederick William would not tolerate his brother-in-law to dictate this course of action, he said, "If they are proud, I will not offer my son to any English princess, and then my daughter will not be good enough for them. I don't care." But deep down he did care. The further Frederick William drew away from England, the more the tension increased, both between the two courts and also between Frederick William and his family, as Zeckendorf made sure to sow discord in the Prussian household. He made false reports to the king about his children, saying that Frederick was an ambitious prince who only wanted the king's death so he could become sovereign himself. Even more alarming, he had no affection for the army, and Wilhelmina was an adviser to her brother and spoke ill of the king. As the king was avaricious and cruel, and had a bad temper, aggravated by his fits of gout, Wilhelmina began to live in fear of being harshly dealt with whenever she appeared before him. And it was the same case for Frederick. Describing how her father treated them, Wilhelmina said, "The king starved my brother and myself." As he himself performed the office of carver, he helped everyone at the table except us. We lived on nothing but coffee and milk and dried cherries, which entirely vitiated my stomach. My share of insult and invectives, on the contrary, was extremely liberal. He never saw my brother without threatening him with his cane, and this inspired the Crown Prince with an invincible fear of his father, which grew up with him even to the age of maturity. But Wilhelmina and Frederick found consolation in each other's company and in their shared interests. It was Wilhelmina who first encouraged her brother to study and improve his mind. About this, Frederick later said, "When I was young, I never would do anything, but was always running about." My sister Wilhelmina said to me, "Are you not ashamed so to neglect your talents?" I then took to my books. Reading and studying together, the siblings discovered the works of various French authors and became familiar with the ideas of the Enlightenment, with literature and poetry. But they had to do this in secret, as the king hated books and all things French with a sort of passion, and would not allow Frederick to engage in such pursuits. His main desire was to make the Crown Prince an excellent soldier, not a poet or a philosopher. Music was another thing the siblings enjoyed, and, as Frederick later said, when they played duets, the harmony of their musical instruments brought them comfort. Wilhelmina called her lute Il Principe, while Frederick called his flute La Principessa. The king was often angry with Wilhelmina because she encouraged the artistic tastes of her brother and his love of literature. Meanwhile, time passed and England continued mute on the subject of marriages. Annoyed at this delay and pushed by Zeckendorf and Grumko, the Prussian king decided to marry his daughter to the Duke of Weissenfels. But to this the queen would not consent. While her parents argued over the subject of her marriage, the princess reflected on her situation. "I wished," Wilhelmina said, "for a real friend to whom I could feel both esteem and inclination, who might ensure my felicity and whom I might render happy. I foresaw that the Prince of Wales would not suit me, as he did not possess the qualities which I required. The Duke of Weissenfels, on the other hand, pleased me still less. The state of my poor heart may easily be conjectured." The Duke of Weissenfels was 24 years older than Wilhelmina, while the Prince of Wales was described by the Queen in very unflattering terms. "He has a very narrow mind," the Queen told her daughter. "But if you are easy-going with him, and put up with his profligacy, you will govern him entirely, and you will become more king than he is when his father is dead. Think a little what a part you will play. Upon you will depend the good or ill destiny of Europe and the rule of the English nation." Frederick William, who wanted to conclude his daughter's marriage to the Prince of Wales as much as the Queen did, blamed his wife for the behaviour of the English court. Therefore he told the Queen to write to her brother and sister-in-law and find out what they intended to do. "As for your ill-brought-up son," the King said, "do not expect that I shall ever marry him to an English princess. I want no daughter-in-law that gives herself airs and fills my court with intrigues as you do. Your son is a rascal who wants to be corrected rather than married. I detest him." At the Queen's instigation, Frederick wrote himself to his aunt and promised he would marry Princess Amelia without his father's consent if the Queen of England could pull through his sister's marriage with the Prince of Wales. When the answer from England came, Sophia Dorothea was plunged into despair. George II was clear: both marriages or none. Meanwhile, Frederick's mistreatment at the hands of his father was causing Wilhelmina a great deal of worry. Beaten, humiliated, and in one instance almost strangled to death, the prince was driven to despair and decided to flee his father's court. Foreseeing the consequences, Wilhelmina tried to convince her brother to give up his risky plan. To his sister's pleas, Frederick responded, "Cuthell is in my interest. He is attached to me and will follow me to the farthest corner of the globe. Keith will also join me. These two friends will facilitate my flight." But they didn't get too far. When the king found out about his son's attempted flight, he was enraged. Declared a deserter from the army, Frederick was incarcerated in the fortress of Custrin, while the king ordered that Cuthell's execution should take place before Frederick's eyes. But, more merciful than the king, nature was on Frederick's side. Before Cuthell was executed, the crown prince fainted and saw his friend no more. Meanwhile, beaten by her father and accused of being an accomplice of her brother, Wilhelmina was locked up for months. Deprived of necessary food, her health suffered and she became as thin as a skeleton. Having heard that she had nothing to eat but a vile sort of soup made of water and salt, the French Protestant colony in Berlin left baskets of food for Wilhelmina in hidden places where they could be picked up. Day after day, the king's messengers visited Wilhelmina in her captivity with the mission to convince her to submit to the king's wish and accept to be married to the Margrave of Schwedt. If her aversion towards him was too much, she might accept the Duke of Weissenfels. But one it had to be. As her mother ordered her to be firm and reject such proposals, the princess didn't give in. However, one day Grumbko entered her room and informed Wilhelmina that the king was prepared to give his daughter the option of marrying the hereditary Prince of Baireuth. If she obeyed, the king promised to grant her, after her wedding, the entire liberty of the crown prince, who was living a miserable life at Küstrin. Based on this promise, she accepted to be married to Frederick, Prince of Baireuth, and in this way Wilhelmina sacrificed herself to save her brother. But in obeying her father's wish, she angered her mother, who declared that she would no longer acknowledge Wilhelmina as her daughter. "I will never forgive you," the queen told her daughter. This promise the queen kept. On the 20th of November 1731, the 22-year-old princess was married to a man she had never seen. But, to her surprise, the 20-year-old Prince of Baireuth seemed to have the qualities she wanted in a husband. He was polite, intelligent, and kind. 3 days later, Frederick was set at liberty and returned to Berlin to see his sister. "In all my life," Wilhelmina said, "I never felt so wild a delight." Then the Prince of Baireuth took Wilhelmina to his poverty-stricken court in the Principality of Baireuth. The couple lived in the dilapidated residence of the Margrave of Baireuth, where the palace rooms had no fires, the windows were broken, and nothing had been mended for more than a century. The food was scarce and coarse, and when Wilhelmina's shirts were worn out, she couldn't afford replacing them. Although the birth of her only child in the summer of 1732 was a difficult experience for Wilhelmina, it brought her much-needed happiness. A few months later, when she travelled to Berlin to join her husband, who had been summoned there by his father-in-law, Wilhelmina experienced the most painful disillusionment of her life. On seeing her daughter, the queen said, "Why have you come here?" Wilhelmina said that she had come there on the king's commands and to see her mother, whom she adored. To that the queen replied, "Say rather that you have come to plunge a dagger in my heart and to prove to the world at large that you have been fool enough to marry a beggar. After such a step, you should have remained at Baireuth, so as to hide your shame there, instead of spreading it before us all. That is what I ordered you to do." The king's words were of the same effect. "How I pity you," he said to his daughter. "You have not even bread. But I am also a poor man, and I cannot give you much." Heartbroken, Wilhelmina told her brother that she wouldn't return to Berlin anytime soon. In 1735, when Wilhelmina's father-in-law died, her husband became the new Margrave of Baireuth. The first 2 years of Wilhelmina as Margravine of Baireuth were the happiest. Her husband, Margrave Frederick, whom she passionately loved, gave her as a present for her 26th birthday the hermitage and increased her allowance. And Frederica, her daughter, who was growing up happily, was destined to become one day, according to her contemporaries, the most beautiful princess in the world. It was also the time when the Margravine began to draw up plans for the improvement of her small principality. And in this she would be supported by the Margrave, who shared his wife's passion for art, music and culture. In the spring of 1740, when his father died, Frederick became king. Shortly after, Wilhelmina wrote to congratulate him, calling him Sire and Your Majesty. He replied to her, saying, "I beg you to treat me as brother, and not as king. The first character will always be more glorious to me than the second." In October of that year, Wilhelmina travelled to Berlin to see her brother. From there she went to Rheinsberg, where Frederick had made arrangements to receive his sister in a suitable manner at his beautifully renovated mansion. By a twist of fate, Wilhelmina joined her brother a few days after he received some interesting news. The Emperor had died. On the 21st of November, Voltaire also arrived at Rheinsberg. That night, during a festive gathering at the Prussian court, amid music and dancing, the king led Voltaire to the Margravine and said, "Here I present to you my beloved sister." It was the moment when Wilhelmina and Voltaire became friends for life. During those happy days at Rheinsberg, Wilhelmina noticed that at times her brother's thoughts were far away. She never mentions in her memoirs whether he told her about the audacious step he was about to take. A few weeks later, Frederick II was in Silesia. Back in Baireuth, Wilhelmina discovered that her husband had become attracted to her lady-in-waiting, and their affair had been going on for some years. Her husband's infidelity broke Wilhelmina's heart, but she decided to focus her attention on other things. In October 1742, she began corresponding with Voltaire, an exchange of intellectual and friendly letters that would last for many years. He even came to see the Margravine at Baireuth and found the place most charming. Throughout her life, books have been Wilhelmina's trusted companions. As she read constantly and widened her interests, she decided to establish a university, and in 1743 the Margravine and Margrave of Baireuth opened the University of Erlangen with great pomp and ceremony, which lasted 3 days. The beautifying of the hermitage gave Wilhelmina interest and made her forget about her domestic worries. An accomplished musician and composer of opera works, the Margravine began in 1746 to build an opera house on a grand scale, and this glory of Rococo art was completed in 1748. The floor of the opera house was free to all citizens. Through all these projects, Baireuth acquired fame in the artistic world, and on the 26th of September 1748, when Frederica was married to the Duke of Württemberg, there were several performances at the opera. As her ill health increased, Wilhelmina's only solace was to write to her brother, and it seems that their correspondence was beneficial to both of them, as they always consulted each other and kept each other informed of the incidents in their lives. In one of his many letters to his sister, Frederick wrote, "You are my consolation and the only person to whom my heart can open without constraint." By 1755, Wilhelmina feared that war was coming to Europe. She knew about the frictions between the British and the French struggling for supremacy in North America. But Frederick tried to reassure his sister by telling her that it was a long way from the Ohio River to the Spree. Yet before long, Prussia and England signed a treaty in January 1756, and France sided with Austria. And by the end of August 1756, when Frederick became aware of Austria's hostile schemes, the Prussian army marched into Saxony. The 7 Years' War had arrived in Central Europe. As the war progressed, Wilhelmina followed her brother's journey with keen interest and kept him informed about the enemy's movements in her part of the world. But after his early successes, Frederick found himself in a difficult situation when he was defeated by the Austrians at the Battle of Kolin in June 1757. As the war advanced, Frederick wrote to his sister saying that if the situation was irretrievable, he would end his life. Worried about him, Wilhelmina insisted to intervene on his behalf and negotiate peace by means of France. Frederick replied to her by saying, "I leave it all to you. To whom could I more fitly entrust the interests of a country whose welfare I seek than to a sister whom I adore and who, although far more accomplished than I, is another myself?" Wilhelmina thought of making use of Voltaire and begged for his help to approach the French and bring about peace. She wrote numerous letters and began negotiating peace with 5 different emissaries. But slowly Wilhelmina was slipping into her grave, as she had been ill for many years. Although writing those long letters drained her strength, she only stopped when she was physically unable to hold a pen. On the 14th of October 1758, when Frederick was defeated by the Austrians at Hochkirch, Wilhelmina died thinking of him. She was only 49. Her last wish was to have her brother's letters buried with her. 3 days later, when Frederick heard of her death, he cried and said, "In losing her, I have lost everything." 10 years after Wilhelmina's death, Frederick the Great built in his garden at Sanssouci the Temple of Friendship, dedicated to her memory.